Resuming debate?
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
My name is Garnet Jennis, husband, father, reader, and blessed with the honor of serving in Canada's national parliament. I want to thank you for listening. I think one of the biggest problems plaguing our society is that we don't actually debate much anymore. We inhabit our own little silos, conservatives talking to other conservatives, liberals talking to other liberals, oil workers talking to other oil workers, tax lawyers talking to other tax lawyers. You get the idea. People talking to those with whom they already share significant common experience and values. And that means that when we get together across experiential or values divides, we often end up shouting at each other or just talking past each other. So if you're listening to this podcast because you agree with me, that's great. But if you've tuned in and you come from a different political party, a different intellectual tradition, or a different part of the country, I want you to feel particularly welcome because this podcast is for you. It's about creating opportunities for good, fruitful conversation and debate among people who don't always agree. In order to do that, we're going to start every show with an interview with a guest, but then conclude with a debate involving one or two other parliamentarians from different parties. We're going to try to get into some really meaty and important topics, and not just about politics. Well, it's great to be back post-election. Today, we're talking about Bill 21 in Quebec. This is a provincial issue, to be sure, but it's one that has had and is having a big impact on the national scene. We certainly saw that in the last election. Now, Bill 21 prevents people who wear visible religious symbols from working in Quebec's public service. Its stated intent is to preserve an appearance of secularism and religious neutrality in the delivery of public service. Its effect, though, is that people who work in certain public service positions and who wish to serve all members of the public while being true to their authentic religious convictions are forced to either compromise their convictions by removing their religious symbols, leave their profession, or leave the province. During the last campaign, the leader of the Bloc Québécois was asked a question about Bill 21. That question provoked a firestorm and was subsequently criticized by all major party leaders. Now, full disclosure, I disagree with Bill 21. I'm also not a Quebecer. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to hear from a couple great Quebecers who are from different political and faith traditions, who are yet also both part of communities most likely to be impacted by Bill 21. I hope you enjoy the conversations. This opportunity where we give voice to Quebecers on a Quebec issue that is nonetheless of great interest to people across the country. So for the first segment, we're going to hear from Richard Marceau. Bouchard was a Bloc member of Parliament from 1997 to 2006. In 2004, he converted to Judaism, and since leaving electoral politics, he has worked for the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs and its predecessor organization, the Canada-Israel Committee. In 2011, he published A Quebec Jew, From Bloc Québécois MP to Jewish Activist. Richard, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you for having me, Garnet.
So, Richard, before we get into the particulars of the Bill 21 issue, it's great for people who listen to this podcast to get a bit of a sense of who you are and where you're coming from. We'd love to hear a little bit about your kind of personal and religious journey, and also get a bit of a sense of how much overlap there is between people that identify as Quebec nationalists and people that are part of the Jewish community.
So we have like 3 hours only for me. Well, again, thank you very much for having me. Listen, everybody has their own story. Mine is a bit different because I'm from Quebec City, a city that's now, 98% French. That is not the most diverse city in the world or in Canada. But after doing so I'm an old stock Quebec French Canadian family, and actually I can trace back my family back to 1635 when François Marceau arrived at Ile d'Orléans. So deep roots in Quebec. Studied in Quebec, did my first law degree in Quebec City at Laval University, then went on an exchange at Western where I met a Jewish woman, a non-practicing Jewish woman, but she opened the door to me to a world that I did not know. I think might be 200 Jews in Quebec City, maybe 250. So I never really had a chance to meet Jews before. At the time, even though I grew up in a fairly practicing Catholic family, I had distanced myself from any religious practice, like a lot of young people. But even though my late wife Lori was secular, she piqued my curiosity. I started to read. It was pre-internet. I read, and in a mix of I guess personal, intellectual, religious, spiritual journey led me to after a trip to Israel that I undertook as a member of parliament. To explore the possibility of converting, which I did in 2004. I did it for personal, spiritual, religious, and intellectual reasons, and it's probably one of the best decisions I've made in my life.
Interesting. That's such a fascinating history and experience, and it's a different experience from obviously most Jews living in the province of Quebec, right? Most come from a Jewish background, and conversion is relatively uncommon in Judaism, isn't it?
Judaism, as compared to its daughter religions that are Islam and Christianity, is not a proselyting religion, and in fact, Judaism makes it hard to convert, and you really have to want it. If you're a man, there's the added issue, let's call it that way, of the marker in the flesh, i.e. circumcision, which I now understand why it's done at 8 days and not at 34 years old.
Okay, we won't ask too many more detailed questions on that, but yeah, thanks for giving us
all this to say that you really want to to want it. And it's a serious commitment, and when you're joining the Jewish people that you're joining a people that has throughout the ages been hated, persecuted, killed, basically around the world. So that is why the rabbis make the bar quite high. I myself think that Judaism would benefit from making conversion easier on people, and allow or have open the doors and the windows a little bit wider, so that people who are spiritual seekers look into Judaism as an option that could be interesting for them.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. We could talk about this for 3 hours, I'm sure, but I want to just bridge from that back into the topic of Bill 21, and hear a bit about your reflections on the bill, the history around it, and maybe if you've had any sort of personal evolution in thinking as you've gone through this spiritual journey over the course of your life. How have your views on questions of secularism and identity as they're discussed in Quebec, how have they evolved over the course of that time and since?
This issue of secularism is hard to understand if you're not knowledgeable in the history of Quebec. Until the 1960s, the Catholic Church was quite powerful in Quebec, and in fact, it was the major church, as opposed to the rest of Canada, for example, where other churches, there were more diversity religious. You had the Catholics, you had the Anglicans, you had the United Church, et cetera, et cetera. Quebec society was a fairly homogeneous society, especially the French-speaking society. Which led to things like Quebec being the last jurisdiction in North America to grant women the right to vote, because the church was opposed to it. And Quebec women were granted the right to vote politically at the provincial level only in 1944. Quebec society, Quebec was the last jurisdiction to create a ministry of education, because the church wanted to keep control over education. So the power of the church was felt in the 1960s to have been a break on Quebec's modernization. So when the Quiet Revolution started in the 1960s, that Quiet Revolution included a religious revolution, with nobody being killed, by the way, but it was a very, very fast change in society, a very fast and deep change in Quebec society that led Quebec to now be in North America the least religiously observant society, where most people, or the highest ratio of people living in common law relationships, for example. It led to, for example, when I was sitting myself in the House, when we had the debate over same-sex marriage, it was in Quebec that we saw the least engagement or the least pushback against same-sex marriage in Canada. So you have on a variety of issues, Quebecers have decided we do not want religion to be mingled with political power. We want separation between political power and religion. Then to go a bit broader than simply Quebec, when the Enlightenment happened and people start to question religion and appeal more to reason, broadly speaking, two models of the relationship between state and religion appeared. One, which is now more let's call it the Anglo-Saxon or the American model, where you want religions to be protected from the state. Right? The Pilgrims came to the U.S. and parts of them, some of them wanted to escape the established church and wanted religious freedom. So they wanted protection of the religious beliefs from the state. The French model is the flip side of it. They want the state to be protected from the power of religion. They saw religion being, or organized religion, and in this case was the Catholic Church. They saw the church of having too much influence on the state, and they wanted to protect the state from any encroachment of churches. So what you're seeing in Bill 21 is a bit of play of that. So Quebecers, having been under the power of the Catholic Church for so long, they said, we do not want any more of that. And one way to do it is to make sure that there's no religious presence in the political or with people in position of authorities. And here, Garnet, have to just tweak a little bit your introduction, because the positions that the holders of would be prohibited or are prohibited from wearing religious symbols is a fairly limited number of positions, people in authority plus teachers. So all this to say that there are reasons, political, historical reasons for that bill to have come in to have been put in place. It's now important to say that I oppose Bill 21. I'm on record as opposing it, and the Jewish community is also on record as opposing it officially. But it's important to understand the genesis and where it comes from to frame the discussion in a way that I think is relevant to Quebec society.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for that overview. Could you maybe share a little bit more about why, in light of and maybe in spite of that overview, and your rich understanding of it and your heritage in Quebec, why you still think Bill 21 is the wrong way to go?
I don't think that a woman wearing a hijab, a man wearing a kippah, or men wearing a turban is indicative of his or her desire to proselytize or to bring religious views into any position. Somebody could be without any symbol and have, for example, strong Christian beliefs, or could have without having any exterior signs, have strong political beliefs one way or another. I know enough of people wearing religious symbols to know that they go from they are represented across the political spectrum. You could be a hijab wearing woman and be an NDP supporter or a conservative supporter. And you can be a turban-wearing person and be a liberal or conservative. And in fact, you two, both you, Garnet, and Samir, who's going to be speaking to you afterwards, sit in the House with people in the three political parties, being the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals, and people wearing a turban. So wearing a turban is not indicative of a preset of beliefs, either political or religious, that will be imposed on society. I think in the context of Bill 21, there is a bit of a fear of religion coming back, and a lot of people had said during the debate is like, oh yeah, so we kicked religion out of school, we took the crucifixes out of the classrooms, we got rid of the school boards that were either Catholic or Protestant to replace them by school boards based on languages back in 1997 with a constitutional amendment. So we're not going to let religion back into schools, not making the distinction that a neutral public space, a neutral state, does not mean and should not mean an anti-religious state or an anti-religious public square. Having a separation of church and state allows people to, yes, not believe or not express their religious belief in any way, shape, or form, but it also allows people to be able to express their religious beliefs in ways that work for them. So there has been confusion between a state that is neutral and a state that would try to push religion out of the public square, defined actually quite broadly. And that is where I have an important philosophical difference with proponents of Bill 21.
Yeah, I think those are important and excellent points. It strikes me as a bit ironic as a practicing Catholic myself that, recognizing the history of Quebec that you've talked about with the Catholic Church, that I, as a practicing Catholic, could still get a job as a teacher in Quebec because I'm a religious person who doesn't wear a religious symbol, and obviously I would see my responsibilities in that role or any other public role as serving everyone with respect and goodwill and justice. So there's some irony in the application of a religious symbol law in particular, namely that it wouldn't apply actually to in most cases the Catholic community, but it would apply to particular minority communities.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But to add a layer of complexity, some of them of the strongest proponents of Bill 21 have actually been women of North African descent or origin, who have, for example, I can think of a couple of them coming from Algeria, who in the 1990s saw the Front Islamique du Salut and all that radical Islamist agenda that led to thousands of deaths, and say we left North Africa to escape this, and we do not want the repeat. We don't want to see the same thing happening here. And their voice were actually, I think, the most powerful in that debate. So to say like the entire Muslim community, I do not purport to speak for that community. They're quite capable of doing it. But those voices were quite open and quite loud during that debate. So to say that every Muslim was opposed, or every Jew was opposed, or every Sikh was opposed, it would not be a correct framing of the texture and the depth of the debate that happened in Quebec.
Well, that's very interesting as well. And from what I understand, there are a number of Muslim majority countries that have laws that most Canadians, I think, would describe as quite restrictive on a religious freedom level. And
right.
So,
and plus, like, remember again, not only that, but at least the Quebec elites look a lot to Europe at what's going on there. right? And when they were hearing Quebec being accused of being X and Y and being horrible, and they saw that in France, it's not only the teachers and the judges and the police officers who cannot wear religious symbols, but if you're a student in a public school, you cannot wear a religious symbol. So they say, well, we see our, fellow democracies in Western Europe having laws that ban that, and it was deemed to be respectful of the human rights by European courts, for example. So here, the Bill 21 is much more restricted, and Quebec is put on in the prisoner's box and saying, you are bad, et cetera, et cetera. That's the hyperbole or the hyperbolic accusations against the entire Quebec society it has actually hurt the people who were opposed to Bill 21.
That's maybe a good segue into asking about kind of how the criticisms people have expressed from outside of Quebec of Bill 21 are received and perceived. I don't know that I would agree that France hasn't been subject to significant criticism over their approach to secularism. It seems to me that there has been a lot of criticism of the French approach in France as well, and I guess because France is, the European Union is a much kind of weaker structure than the Canadian state is. That there's sort of it's easier for France to kind of say, well, this is what we're doing, and too bad. But it does seem that in response to the debate around Bill 21, like there was a particularly negative reaction in Quebec when people outside of Quebec have opinions or offer comments on the bill. And it would seem to me that a person can disagree with Bill 21, can disagree with a particular decision of the Quebec legislature without wanting to attack or demonize Quebec society as a whole, and while still maintaining an overall positive view of Quebec and Quebecers. I love Quebec. I love going to Quebec. I'm working hard to improve my ability to speak French, and I happen to disagree with Bill 21. Why is there a sense that Quebec as a whole is somehow being attacked when people disagree with the bill?
Because the tone of what was said in many places was to portray Quebec as being racist for having a point of view that was different, and a point of view that is applied in states like, again, France is one of them, and other Western European nations. What Quebecers are saying, whether, by the way, they're federalists or sovereignists or in between or both or whatever, wherever they are on the spectrum, is that if, as Quebecers identify themselves as a nation, and if being a nation has any meaning, it must include the possibility of doing things differently. And otherwise, it's just we're saying it, but there's no real consequence. And the portray of Quebec as being obscurantist, as being anti-minority, as being opposed to any kind of difference, being a place where opposed to rights and freedom and etc., is grating on a lot of people. And they're saying, well, maybe we're simply doing things differently, and our version of separation of church and state or protection of minorities is doing it. It's not better, it's not worse than the one that we see in Canada, but it's just different, and let us be different in the way we express that difference, I guess.
Richard, thanks so much for joining us. I have one final question, just kind of building off that to wrap us up today. So if there's somebody listening to this, wouldn't have to be a person from a minority faith background, but let's say it's a Jewish person living in Toronto, in Edmonton, or Vancouver, who feels deeply about this law in opposition to it. What advice would you give them about whether to engage the conversation, how to engage the conversation? Would you tell them to to find ways of speaking about it, but to be cautious and informed? Would you tell them, well, maybe focus on problems in your own community? What advice would you give to people listening who have strong views about Bill 21 who are outside of Quebec?
I believe in dialogue, and I believe that people can disagree and engage in a good debate. Jews are well known to be engaged in debate, and in fact, when Jews study, they tend to do it in Chavgutam. It's a group. It's two people arguing with one another. That's the Jewish way of doing things. So we're not afraid of debates. And if you read the Talmud, or if you just speak at it, you'll see that it's a compodium of people arguing with one another. But don't blanket state, don't come in with preconceived notions. Engage in respectful dialogue. Listen to the other. Understand that when you're yourself a minority, remember that French Quebecers represent 2% of North America. So there's a sense of fragility of society. And the fragility of their identity. Respect coming to you with humility, but that doesn't mean not to disagree. And again, I'll close by saying that I disagree with Bill 21. I said it then, I'm saying it now. A good debate is respectful, can be fiery, can be spirited. But you don't simply talk, you also have to be able to listen.
Mm-hmm. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. You've opened a whole bunch of strands for potential conversation that we may want to have you back and dig into further. So it's been great having you on. Great to see you, and look forward to chatting more and hearing what the feedback is from people who listen to this about the important points you've made.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Okay, stay tuned. We'll have Samir on in a moment. Resuming debate. So for the second half of this conversation, I'm very pleased to be joined by Samir Zubari, Liberal MP from Pierrefonds, Montreal area riding. Samir is a proud Quebecer and a Muslim whose extended family includes Jews and Christians. Samir and I have become good friends and worked together a lot, especially as co-chairs of the Canada-Uyghur Parliamentary Friendship Group. So Samir, it's great to see you. Great to have you joining us today.
It's great to be here, Garnet, and to see you on the podcast and to hear your voice.
Thank you. Yeah. So we're talking Bill 21, obviously, and we'll get back to that in a moment, but I can't have you on without just getting you to share a little bit on the Uyghur issue, and we can quickly touch on that because I know it's something that we've worked on a lot and so important to many of our listeners as well. So I think we first met during hearings on the Uyghur genocide. This was a couple summers ago. You graciously suggested we grab dinner, took me to this great Thai place in Ottawa, and we were chatting, but we were both, I think, a little bit shell shocked, right? Just after this day of horrific testimony about what is happening to Uyghurs in China. And I think it's good for people to know that there's a lot of cross-party cooperation that's happened on this issue. We've been able to work well together and engage with Heather in the NDP, with Alexei from the Bloc, and colleagues in the Senate as well. I wonder if you can just share a little bit about kind of your experience engaging on the Uyghur issue, and also what you think we can prioritize and achieve coming up in this 44th Parliament.
Sure, and I mean it was a fateful time for us to actually meet through that through the hearings around the Uyghur genocide. Those were very powerful hearings that we had, and powerful testimony, and it gave us both the opportunity to get to know each other much better and to work together as co-chairs of the friendship group. And I think we've done some amazing work thus far. In different ways across the aisle, but to advance human rights and to advance this very important issue, to build awareness around it. And I really appreciate our work together and how we've been able to do that. It's really significant and a good example for others to emulate within the House of Commons into the future. For me personally, what touched me about this issue was just the depth of pain that we heard from firsthand people who were victims of what's happening right now within China. We heard from subject matter experts that verified their accounts. We heard from legal scholars. We heard from Canadian diplomats, all of whom were echoing and saying pretty much the same thing, that there is an unfolding genocide towards a group of people, and that these people cannot escape that. There's unspeakable crimes against humanity that are occurring. And as a humanitarian and as somebody who has firm conviction when it comes to the dignity and respect of people, I feel very strongly, as I know you do and others in our subcommittee, that this has to stop. So I'm very happy that we've been able to, for the last 2 years together, to advance and build awareness around this issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And, Parliament's resuming very soon, and look forward to diving into this issue once again, working together and trying to get more things done. So let's go from that to Bill 21. I've spoken with various national Muslim organizations. The National Council of Canadian Muslims has been very active on this issue, for example. How does Bill 21 impact individuals and communities in your area, around your area? What are your what's your sense of the direct impacts of the bill?
Well, I'm really happy that you're actually doing the podcast on Bill 21, and it is an issue that is outside of Alberta. It's an issue that is wholly within provincial jurisdiction. It's a legislation brought forth by the province of Quebec, but it is one that impacts Canadians. It impacts Quebecers. It impacts people deeply. Some individuals are directly impacted, those who have ostentatious religious dress, namely hijab, kippa, and turban. And if you go into Canada's major cities, the larger cities where you have 1 million plus people, you'll see diverse communities are contributing to societies, to cities, to our country, to our provinces. And some of them do come with headdress, religious headdress, or religious symbols. But they still do their work well, and they still contribute to our society, and they still do a lot of work that some of us might not want to do, or else in that we need some professionals within those domains. And what's happening right now is that this piece of legislation says that you cannot become a public school teacher, you cannot become a police officer, you cannot become a government lawyer if you wear these ostentatious religious dresses. So it impacts individuals who are wearing, for example, turbans, wearing kippas, wearing hijabs directly. And it limits their ability to employment. It limits their dreams to become a teacher or a police officer or a government lawyer. So it limits them in a very serious way. But it also sends a very challenging message to communities. You might not wear those dresses, but you might know somebody who does. And it sends a signal that, that one is one's commitment to society is put into question, and that's how it impacts communities. On the other hand, Richard, your previous guest, did mention the very important point of Quebec history, of knowing Quebec society. And for your listeners, I would encourage your listeners to look up a report that was commissioned by the government of Quebec at the time, around 2007, I believe it was. It was called the Bouchard-Taylor Report. And there was an in-depth commission that led to a report that really did a very good expose on what Richard spoke about earlier, which is the progression of Quebec society, how the church at one point in time did have a deep impact into people's lives, one that was that wasn't wholly welcomed. And in the 60s, there was the Quiet Revolution, where Quebec society said, we while we are of Catholic heritage, we don't want the church to necessarily be interfering in each and every aspect of our lives. And that's when a major shift happened within Quebec society. When Quebec society started to move away from faith, started to become ostentatiously much more secular, and started to really come to the fore and stand up on its own 2 feet and say that, you know, we are proud of our heritage, we are proud of our culture, and we're proud of our language. And today, though, we have minorities that are different. Immigration patterns are different, and as Richard mentioned earlier, there is a concern, an uneasiness around what this can potentially mean for Quebec culture into the future. So Bill 21 is a response to that uneasiness. Whether or not it is necessary is another question, but it is a response to that feeling of uneasiness within many areas of Quebec society.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really good for people to understand even when they disagree, and I found that even you know, going back to this whole area of working across party lines, that you may still disagree at the end of the day, but it's really good to be able to just understand, okay, where's someone coming from? What are the influences, maybe the negative experiences that they have had that have led them to the negative or positive experiences that have led them to the to reacting in a certain way to something. I think you can be much more persuasive, actually, if you start from that place of just trying to understand what is the why behind it, but then also appreciate that it may be a reaction to something historic, but there are concrete impacts on people that we have to think about.
Certainly. And
yeah,
I would say that those outside the province of Quebec do need to take the time to actually learn why is this happening? Where is this legislation coming from? What's the history and culture of Quebec in order to really get involved in some capacity in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. So let me jump to that then. I mean, what role do you think there is for non-Quebecers in this conversation? If you're talking to people from your own faith community or from other faith communities who are outside of Quebec and are saying what's going on, you know, what role do they have to play in the conversation?
Well, I would say, all Canadians have a role to play in a conversation that impacts the rights and freedoms of fellow Canadians. Quebecers are, proud Canadians too. We have chosen to stay within Canada. This has been our choice, a conscious choice. Yes, we have had robust debates over the decades, but we have chosen Canada. And I think that those outside of Quebec, sometimes we forget that is the case, that Quebecers have chosen Canada. We have helped construct this country. We remain committed to this country. And so there is a role to play for those outside of Quebec. While this is a Quebec debate and one must understand and learn the contours of the province and its history, there is a role for those outside. And I would say the starting point for anybody who really wants to get involved in this debate is to check out the report I mentioned, the Bouchard-Taylor report. And there is a great expose, as I mentioned there, about the history, culture of the province on this particular issue of reasonable accommodation, or how to accommodate minorities and how to deal with differences within our society. I would suggest another book called Unlikely Utopia by Adams, which is a great book that talks about this issue, but also about Canada as a whole and how we are a great country that welcomes people. So as a starting point for those outside, I would say learn about this debate. If you can connect with somebody within Quebec, try to hear different voices on the issue. And as you mentioned, come to some conclusion, independent conclusion of your own.
Mm-hmm. So just maybe putting together something you said and something that Richard said. You're talking about Quebec is part of Canada and Quebecers have chosen Canada. Richard talked about Quebec being a nation, being a distinct society, and therefore that meaning Quebec can do things differently. And these ideas can very much coexist, right? You can have a country, a nation, Canada, that includes different nations that are pursuing aspects of their own distinctiveness while still choosing to be part of the greater whole. But I suppose this is a case where there's a very different history, a very different conception of identity, and very different choices that provoke a strong reaction outside. So it's I think it's possible to hold those things in tandem, but there's a potential tension, isn't there, between those different concepts?
100%. And Quebec, as I'm sure your listeners know, is the common language of Quebecers is French. And with language comes unique cultural differences. For those of your listeners who actually are bilingual, maybe they speak English and another language, they know that that language is powerful and carries certain cultural norms, certain cultural aspects. So Quebecers, by and large, are operating in French, read French, speak French, live in French. And so there are certain, aspects that are different from the rest of Canada, from English Canada. And I do feel that that those differences have to be appreciated, that Quebec's nationhood does need to be appreciated. But it doesn't mean that there can't be an interaction, an exchange, and even a robust conversation around issues. I do feel it's important for those outside of Quebec, and we do have Franco-Ontarians, we have Francophone communities in Manitoba and in the Maritimes across Canada. I think it's important to strengthen Franco communities and also to strengthen bilingualism outside of Quebec, so that we as a country can continue to have a conversation and can communicate with each other to improve understanding and national cohesion.
Yeah, certainly it was an important point for me in my development as a member of parliament when I was at a level of French that I could just pick up a Quebec newspaper and start to read it, because it's one thing to hear what external commentators or sort of a certain bilingual kind of interpreters are saying, versus being able to just casually say, well, what's in the paper today and what's the tone of commentary. Samir, I want to zero in on the issue of religious symbols, because I made this point to Bouchard as well. I mean, there are some of us who are religious people who don't wear religious symbols, right? So even in terms of the bill's stated intent around neutrality and secularism, it seems sort of odd, the emphasis on symbols, when that doesn't apply to every religious person equally. And there may be, I think a lot of people who wear religious symbols, it's not about trying to project something in a particular space or environment. That's just them practicing their own personal faith. So I mean, why make this distinction between those people who happen to be of faith and wear religious symbols and those people of faith who don't wear religious symbols?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think that we need to ask ourselves, can people be objective even if we come from different walks of life? Can people be objective police officers? Can people be objective lawyers? And can people be good educators if they're coming from different walks of life? And I think all of us can say yes. Every one of those professions has training, robust training that asks its professionals to put aside biases when it comes to those who are police officers and lawyers, when it comes to educators, to educate in a way that is inclusive and courteous to each and every individual within the classroom, respectful of each and every learner within the classroom. So I would say that one's background, one's ostentatious religious dress doesn't impact one's ability to be a great professional in each and every one of those domains. I feel that that each and every one of those professions does have rigorous training that does train people from different walks of life to do their job well. So as Richard mentioned, and many others, I believe you also are not in favor of the bill, and myself, I also am not in favor of the bill for the reason that I feel that one can be a great professional and come from any walk of life.
Yeah, and I would just add that this idea of like the totally neutral person without biases it probably doesn't exist in practice, and it's no more likely to exist among those who are not religious than those who are. I mean, all of us have experiences. All of us have, maybe, yeah. I mean, ideas, instincts about certain things, levels of knowledge or lack of knowledge that impact presumptions that we make in certain situations, and we all work to be objective, to be just, to be fair. But I think probably when you have diversity within a profession, you're likely to get more towards that standard of objectivity, where people from different backgrounds can play off each other, than if you say, no, we're gonna establish one group of people as being sort of more neutral than everyone else.
Certainly, and you know, we are a country and we are a society that is inclusive. Quebec is an inclusive society. It welcomes people from all backgrounds. Canada also is an inclusive country and welcomes people from all backgrounds. And I think throughout this country and in Quebec, we value the inclusion of people. We want to ensure that everybody is respected and fully participating in society. And so I would say we need to remind ourselves about that those ideas, those values, and really give them life.
Yeah. So let me ask you the federal political question here. The Prime Minister has held out the possibility of federal legal intervention in court challenges to Bill 21. My sense is that this legal intervention is sought by some because of the symbolic impact of it, even if it probably won't change the underlying legal arguments, which are going to be made by those who are impacted by the bill. Do you think the government will? Do you think the government should formally intervene? The federal government should formally intervene in these court proceedings?
Well, I mean, to start off with, the Prime Minister has said that he is against the legislation while respecting the jurisdiction of Quebec. He has said that on numerous occasions, and we recognize that Quebec has its jurisdiction, as every province does and should. When it comes to Bill 21, it is winding through the courts right now. It's gone through, in our country, we have 3 levels of courts. So it's gone through the first level, the first instance. It's now in the Quebec Court of Appeal. It almost certainly will go to the Supreme Court. If we look historically at cases, we see that that first off, this is a constitutional issue. What's happening within this case, within this bill, it says that that certain articles of the federal constitution, of our Canadian constitution, which provinces also must respect, are going to be suspended. In particular, the article around freedom of religion, or the section around freedom of religion, is going to be suspended. And how is it suspended? It's suspended through the use of the notwithstanding clause. Quebec also has a charter, and in order to have this legislation passed, our notwithstanding clause also has to be employed. So this is an issue. It's really an exceptional issue when the notwithstanding clause is used. It's been only used in a handful of instances in our country's history. It's being used again for Bill 21. And I think that a lot of Quebecers, this is the point that a lot of Quebecers have a major question mark on, whether or not the notwithstanding clause should be used. Because the idea is that whatever is mentioned in the Constitution, these are kind of touchstone values and principles, and we should be respecting them, and we shouldn't be employing, notwithstanding legislation, or using the notwithstanding clause, I should say. So historically, if we see constitutional cases of this magnitude, the federal government has intervened in them. Does it intervene at the first instance? I haven't done that sort of analysis, but at some point in time, more often than not, the federal government has intervened in cases of this magnitude that touched upon the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what'll happen, but if I look historically, that's what I have to share, and that's my analysis on the question.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, saying that like fundamentally, this is a very important question legally. It's a question that touches on major issues of human rights and religious freedom in Canada. We're up against time a little bit. I want to just get in one more question, then just ask if you have anything to add at the end. Give you the last word here. Coming from Alberta, there is this sense, I think, in the West that when we talk about issues in Quebec that relate to Quebec's distinctive history and culture, that there's a lot more effort made at understanding than at some of the things that make particular Western provinces distinct. So I just curious for your thoughts on what would the reaction be? And I know there are different histories. I mean, I don't think it would happen. But if Alberta or Saskatchewan, let's say, pass something like Bill 21 or broaden it, we're pursuing some policy agenda that was seen as very much out of step with the national consensus on issues like this. What do you think the reaction would be? Do you think it would be different? Do you think it should be different compared to something being done in Quebec?
I think it would be quite similar in many ways. I mean, Bill 21 has engulfed many commentators within the nation on this question outside of Quebec and in Quebec. There has been a national conversation on it. Yes, most of it is happening within Quebec, but many prominent individuals outside of the province who look at national issues do weigh in on Bill 21. I feel that Alberta and the prairies are unique, as Quebec is unique, and every region in our country is unique. I think that the same sensitivity that we give to Quebec, for example, we have to have a level of sensitivity for Alberta and for other regions of the country when it comes to issues that are regional in focus. So I think that it would be, fairly similar in some ways. It wouldn't be if there was, for example, Alberta decided to move in a way that suspended articles of the Constitution. I think we'd probably be having a similar national conversation on the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt there'd be a national conversation. I think the perception here is that that the tone would be different. And I mean, I guess the issues that are generally brought up as being of distinct, making us distinct are around aspects of our economy but anyways, I don't want to go all the way down that.
No, and that's fair, and I hear what you're saying. I want to share also that, as Richard mentioned, that a lot of people within Quebec feel that that the way in which we talk about Quebec can at times be veering into quote unquote Quebec bashing, and that is something that that I think that the rest of Canada needs to be mindful of, to not have caricatures around our province, as I think it's fair for Albertans to ask that the rest of Canada doesn't have caricatures around Alberta and Albertans. That is a fair thing to ask, and I think Quebecers ask for the same.
Absolutely. Let's all be kind to each other. It's a last word to you, Samir. Thanks so much for being on. This has been a really rich conversation about an important issue, and also about our country and how we live together. So final word to you. Anything you want to add?
I just want to, thank you for having this conversation, for shedding light on this issue. I think it is an important topic to look at in some detail. I welcome those outside of Quebec to get involved in the conversation, but obviously in a way that is knowledgeable around Quebec's history, culture, language, and uniqueness, and is mindful about fundamental rights and freedoms. Both of those need to be looked at when entering this conversation. And so I welcome this, and thank you for bringing us together.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone. We will be bringing you another podcast in a couple weeks. Great to be back post-election. Leave a review somewhere on the internet. 5 stars, 10 stars if they'll let you, however this works. And thanks again. Look forward to bringing more now that the election's over, now that we're back into this parliament. Samir, hopefully we'll have you back to discuss some other topics, maybe some international human rights topics or the things that come to the fore. Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening. We'll see you again soon.